Let's talk a bit about conditional formatting and what we can do with Excel's conditional formatting features. I have here a data set that contains the marks of a number of students from a variety of schools in and around Bangalore. These are in fact about 50,000 students for whom we have the school code, their total marks across all subjects, and their marks in individual subjects such as Hindi as a third language, science, mathematics, social science, and so on. Now, not all students are required to take these subjects, but if I wanted to get a sense of what is the distribution of marks and whether students have performed well or not, conditional formatting is a fairly effective way of highlighting that information. Let's take an example. If I wanted to take a subset of these students who were from one particular school, so let's say the first school, I totally have around 139 students. Now for these 139 students, if I want to see what the distribution of marks was, I can select these marks for all the students and go to the style section, conditional formatting, and there are a variety of options that are available here. I'll show you what one of these options does, and then we can get back to looking at what all options exist. So I'm going to choose the green, yellow, red color scale and move back to this. You notice that every cell is now colored on a continuous gradient that ranges from green to yellow to red. The higher values like 246 are closer to green, the lower values like 30 are closer to red. And with this, I can quickly see what the distribution of marks are. So here are some students that have scored fairly high values. Let's sort this. I'm going to sort this by total marks in descending order. And you'll see a fairly continuous gradient with the top students scoring 545, going all the way down to the lowest students scoring 13, and there are a few students whose marks we don't have. Let's ignore those. Now, I can color the same, I can use the same gradient to color some of the other subjects. Let's take social sciences. I'm going to select all of the social sciences marks and use conditional formatting with the same scale and color them. Now you'll notice that it's not the same gradient. So some students who've scored reasonably well haven't necessarily scored well in social sciences. This student, for example, has scored 380, which is a fairly good mark, but in social sciences the mark of 30 is nowhere near enough. Here are a few other students that are performing poor. Here are a few more students that are not doing so well. Likewise, there could be some students who are doing fairly poor in some of the subjects but doing extremely well in social sciences. Here are some examples: 69 overall, but with 46 and 42 in the social sciences, or 142 131 overall but 54 in the social sciences, which is relatively good. And this sort of coloring can easily help find patterns across a variety of data sets and help you spot anomalies. If I were to highlight the whole thing using these gradients, then you can quickly see here's a student that's performing poorly in mathematics despite having a good overall score. Here's another one. Here are a couple of students that are not doing so well in English as a second language. Similarly, here's one student that's not doing so well in social sciences, and so on. So without having to read these numbers, conditional formatting gives you a way of identifying patterns across these numbers, and this can be a pretty powerful feature. I've shown you how gradients work with conditional formatting. That's not the only way conditional formatting works. Let me first clear these rules from the entire sheet and choose a different kind of conditional formatting. Let's say I've got the data for some other school. Let me pick the second school, which has about 80 students. And for this school, I'm going to select the total and choose conditional formatting as data bars. Now these data bars are like bar charts within cells. And once again, you'll see that you don't have to read the number to know that this particular student has scored a relatively low value. You can see that practically instantly, and gives you an easy way of moving around and seeing what the value looks like, as if you had the power of a bar chart and the visual ease of a bar chart without necessarily needing to explicitly create and align a bar chart. There are many other kinds of conditional formattings as well. Let's go through some of these. So firstly, you can select a variety of bar charts, or data bars as they are called. There are two broad kinds of data bars: those that have a gradient. These, you'll notice, start with a color and then fade away a little bit, so that's why they're called gradient fills. And there are those that just have a solid fill. Many of these are as effective as one another, so it doesn't really matter which one you pick. What's important though is you use some kind of a visual cue to differentiate between various data types. For example, if I use blue for total marks, I'm probably better off using something other than blue for science, because that way, without even having to read the column name, I can associate a color with the column and figure out what it is. So if I picked red for science and I pick, let's see, I'll pick green for mathematics, then I can quickly read the relative levels and not have to worry about going to the top to figure out what the red column is and green column is. Once I get used to red is science and green is mathematics, it becomes relatively easy. The other scheme that we saw for conditional formatting earlier was color scales. Now you can pick any gradient of colors to walk across. There's a green, yellow, red. There's a red, yellow, green. Now you typically use green, yellow, red where higher is better and lower is worse, because red is typically associated with poor performance, green is typically associated with better performance. But in the cases where a larger number is bad, like for example cost, you'd use a red, yellow, green color scale. The medium values don't necessarily have to be yellow, they could be white as well, and you have two other schemes that represent that. Sometimes values don't necessarily go from bad to good, they just go from 0 to large numbers. For example, a sales, now any sale is good. It doesn't quite matter whether you have uh, 2 crores or 10 crores, just that 10 crores is much more than 2 crores. You don't necessarily want to represent any of it as red, so a green white color scale might be more appropriate in that case. um, Yet another type of color scale are the icon sets. So these categorize the values into discrete data sets. So for example, increasing, steady or lower, traffic light signals, or wireless rating symbols, star ratings, Harvey balls. Any one of these could be used to give a sense of the relative categorical position of these. What it does is divides the data set into 3, 4, or 5 equal parts, and each one of these parts gets a certain icon. Now, I've shown you how these predefined rules can be used, but the real power of conditional formatting comes when you are able to define your own rules. For example, let's say I don't quite like these color scales. I want my own color scale. You can click on more rules and pick a 2 color scale or a 3 color scale, and I can say that the lowest value is going to be purple. Let's make that orange, and the highest value is going to be purple, and medium values are going to be white. So I have an orange to white to purple color scheme, which you may well prefer. In fact, it turns out that the purple orange scheme is much better for colorblind people, and works a lot better when you're printing and taking photocopies as well in black and white. Uh, let's explore the rules section a bit more. You can have 2 color scales or 3 color scales. You can customize data bars as well. One fairly important feature is this show data bar only. Let me explain that in a little more detail. Um, you notice that on this 364, the bar is overlapping with the 364, making that a little more difficult to read. Would it be possible to just get rid of these numbers? That's what show data bars does. I can select conditional formatting, data bars, more rules, and out here, if I say show bar only, the numbers vanish. Of course, the disadvantage is that I'm not able to see these numbers, but there's nothing that's stopping us from creating a new column, which again has the total marks, and we can copy the entire data set. And then when we filter by the school again, we have one column which shows the values and another column, one column which shows the bars and another column which shows the values. So that way there's no chance of an overlap. Let's look at these formattings again. You can decide what the minimum value is and what the maximum value is. There are a variety of ways of deciding these. You can choose either a specific value. So you can say anything that's, so you can choose a specific number. So you can say anything starting from 0 gets associated with the lowest value, or you can say the 4% or a certain a percentage value. Importantly, you can pick a formula and write your own formula. You can of course also pick these from a certain cell. I'm not going to go to the details of how you can select the minimum and maximum, but rest assured that there are enough ways of deciding what the lowest value and the highest value will be in any of these 2-color scales, 3-color scales, icons, data bars, and so on. Now, this gives you the power to customize each one of these predefined types of conditional formattings. Now, one way of flexibly applying these is to have multiple conditional formattings. There's nothing that stops me, for example, from having more than one conditional formatting on the same data set. Now, of course, this gets into a hideous combination, but there are cases where with a combination of icons and data bars, for instance, can be useful. There are cases where combinations of color scales and data bars can be useful. And all of these can be managed for a variety of ranges using the conditional formatting manage rules section, which will list all of the conditional formatting rules that are defined on the page and allow you to, in fact, very flexibly define a hierarchy or a cascading set of rules. That's a bit too advanced to get into for this section. Let me just quickly recap what we've covered. We've talked about how it's possible to format specifically conditionally format based on a cell's value the contents of any cell. You can choose to have bars, you can choose to have colors, you can choose to have icons, and all of these will enhance the readability of your data considerably and make it much more easy for a user to understand.